that goes on in our head, and then just try and sort of introduce more desirable ideas that go into the subconscious, but hopefully merge with the subconscious and conscious together, really. But sometimes you will find that, you know, somebody will say to you, right, well, I'm going to say that, yes, I'm going to be very much more positive today, and I'm going to do lots of exercise, and I'm going to eat really well. But internally, you've got that resistance, a bit like when we were talking about the surface level symptoms, that because there's something further down, we don't always believe that. So in order for us to have successful self-hypnosis, we've got to get past that resistance in some way, and actually bypass that critical faculty, even within ourselves. I don't know, again, if any of you have started to look through some of Andrew's book, and there's an exercise in there where he asks you to write down 3 positive things about yourself. Now, if you write 3 positive things and you really believe them, it's very easy to say them out loud, and it's very empowering. But if you say them out loud and you get that uncomfortable feeling, then you know they're not true and that you don't believe them. And that's where, if you're doing self-hypnosis or setting it even for your clients, you need to be very, very careful how you do that. Just telling them that it's going to be like this might actually jar them, and actually immediately hit the critical faculty, and they're going to go, well, that's not true. I don't believe that. Okay, so the way that Andrew suggests is that we do it slightly differently. So we take a slightly gentler approach. Now, I'm sure you've all been on YouTube and you've seen that there's lots of different self-hypnosis things that you can have for feeling more calm, feeling more relaxed, going to sleep. There's so many different things, and they can be quite nice to listen to, but they're not personal. They're not personal to you. So the most effective hypnosis is always going to be when it's bespoke. And you know, one of the things that Andrew sort of does with his own clients, and I do this as well, is that those sort of handcrafted mantras that you put together with your client, with their words, you don't say what mantra would you like as such, you collect those ideas from words they say back to you, that you might even just suggest that after a session where you've introduced those, that they might say those to themselves several times a day to reinforce them. So they don't need to go into any deep hypnosis to do that. Just the repetition of that, or perhaps looking at themselves in the mirror and saying those mantras to themselves 2 or 3 times a day, could have a really positive effect. And obviously that depends at what stage of their process you're at and what else they have to let go of. But the good thing is that, you know, that can be effective in its own right. Some of you will probably have heard the phrase by Emile Coué, which is every day in every way, I'm getting better and better, which is something that you'll find quite often in various scripts. But something you might want to do is introduce that into a mantra. Every day in every way, I'm getting whatever it is they want to say. You know, I'm getting fitter and fitter, I'm becoming more relaxed and more calm, whatever it is that fits, if you like. So just for a moment, just want you to look at this statement. Can you all see that? Can you see the whole thing there? It's just look at this statement for a moment and just read it. And just tell me, with this statement, why you think this might help to bypass the critical faculty. Okay. Shall I read it out loud to you? Maybe that'll help. Okay, so for a certain amount of time, I will momentarily suspend what I believe in this area and willfully accept the belief I want. I will pretend that I'm under hypnosis with myself as both hypnotist and subject. For that time, desire and belief will be one. There will be no conflict because I do this willingly. For this period, I will completely alter my old beliefs. Even though I sit quietly in my mind, I will act as if this belief I want were mine completely. Anybody got any views why that might be helpful in bypassing or reducing the critical faculty?
With like the
who was that, Phoebe? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, with the like the willingly means that you know, they actually want to do it, they're kind of tricking themselves that they want to do it. and the for this period momentarily. It's kind of like you're saying to yourself, like you'll do it for a finite amount of time, so that then you're thinking, okay, maybe after this I can go back to normal or whatever. You just think, right, just for this set period, I'll pretend. I think it says I will act as well at one point. So kind of like, I don't have to become it right now. I can just do it for a bit.
So there's less pressure, isn't there? It's kind of, it's a momentary thing. I can do this. I can manage this. It's more manageable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Very, very good, Phoebe. Anything else that anybody else could identify about that might help to reduce the critical faculty?
I was going to say it's got a touch of the fake it till you make it vibe.
Yeah, yeah. It's suggestive, isn't it? That yeah, you can. Yeah, I think definitely there's a bit of that as well, which would help. Yeah.
It talks about having like no conflict.
Yeah.
So there's nothing to stop you from allowing it.
Yeah, that's also true. There's a why do you think there might be no conflict or less conflict?
Because you're emphasising the I all the time, being yourself.
So the control.
So you're reiterating that back to yourself, that you are able to do all of that.
Yeah, and what is it you're able to do here? Because I think, as Phoebe said, it's kind of minimised the risk a little bit, isn't it? I can do this just for a moment. I can do this. So you're right. It's minimising the I.
You're pretending.
Pardon?
You're pretending.
You're pretending. Yeah, you're pretending. So it's like, yeah, I can pretend. So it's that.
If you're the hypnotist and the subject, does that mean that you're tricking yourself into thinking it's someone else?
No. I haven't really thought about it like that. Yeah, I suppose that's a way you could. I hadn't thought of it that way. I don't think that's how it's intended, but it's an interesting thought.
There's like a Dear John kind of.
Yes, you're kind of disassociating in a sense.
If somebody's resisting, you say, "Oh, it's that person." I just wondered if possibly it was linked a little.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting idea, actually, because some people will disassociate initially, especially if they're resistant. You know, even if you regress them, they might be more disassociated and back here rather than actually in the scene themselves. So it's a sort of a softly, and it does kind of fit with the whole approach, because what this actually suggests is, I'm not going to tell you it's going to be like this. I'm letting you decide. So you're in control. And one of the things I always say to my client is, I'm not going to make you do anything. You're in complete control. This is all about you taking control. You're going to take back control. But it's also, making something that might be quite big into something a bit softly. So it's a little bit like, yeah, I'm quite happy to accept the fact that, yeah, I'm pretending for now, but I can do that just for a little while. So I can do this sort of step by step, if you like. So there is that element, but that's really quite an interesting one, Siri, on that, to think about it that way, the disassociation side, which I hadn't actually thought of.
Yeah, it's the my friend John technique.
Yeah. So it's almost like, yeah, it's not me, so it makes it easier. But there's no sort of, the old-fashioned way many years ago would have been, you will feel like this, you know, and the NLP approach perhaps is very much like that. And actually, you're going to hit the critical faculty immediately, because they're going to go, no, I'm not. You know, they're not going to believe that. So it's actually, it's a little bit softly. And you'll probably notice that the whole approach that Andrew has is, it is much more persuasive, gently. You know, this is all about you. We're not going to jump in there, and it's not about us at all. It's about them. So that's one of the reasons that would work. So some really good observations there from all of you, actually.
What you're doing is temporarily changing the door policy.
Yeah.
So that the bouncer has permission to allow this to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a good way of putting it. And it makes it so much easier, isn't it? It's not like, I'm not ever going to do this again, or I'm going to do this all the time. It's just like, oh, I can let that in just for a while. Yeah, that's not too bad.
I suppose in a way you're not setting them up to fail as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That if they can't, you know, stick to that.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. So there's a good point. So it's just that it's the fact that you're kind of teaching the client maybe that they can just suspend reality for a while, and they know they are. They know they can. You know, they're saying, yeah, I'm pretending in that particular statement. I'll just pretend that just for now I'm going to feel like this, and they're willingly accepting it because it's not being forced upon them, and you're not giving them a statement that they're going to, you know, buck at and say, well, no, there's no way I believe that. So it just gives them a way in, and it gives you a way in as well. And it's just that whole idea of just stopping any conflict, really. And the fact that even in that statement it says there's no conflict. So it's a really good way to sort of get them to start taking on those changes. So although you might not have alleviated the problem yet, you might not have actually completely bypassed that critical faculty, you're just beginning to. Okay, so yeah, it knows, you know, they know they're not saying something that's true, they're just for a moment focusing on that new idea, and they're willing to do that because as Andrew said, they're not setting themselves up to sale. Or was it Louise? I'm not sure actually. One of you did. Okay, so one of the approaches that Andrew's introduced is this stepping stone approach, which kind of fits in with this approach as well. So it's a case of taking a positive idea that will have come from the client. So you're not making up this idea and saying, right, I'm going to tell you that it's going to be like this. You'll have an idea it will have come out in their language during that sort of initial chat. So in this first example here, instead of saying I'm in control of my eating, because that particular client might have said I need to feel in control of my eating, starting to begin with more gently with I want to feel in control of my eating. Instead of I am able to have a loving relationship, I want to have a loving relationship. We might want to say I would like to, but it's just a very softly just getting used to the idea and accepting that's what they want. I'm worthy of promotion, but no, I want to feel worthy of promotion. So they've actually acknowledging what that want is, and they're on the journey. You know, we all know if there's a big problem, if you think about everything all together, it's overwhelming, isn't it? But if you can just say, okay, we'll just break it down step by step and we'll get there. This does go against some rules of positive thinking. As I said, there are some much more brash approaches that would say you must say that you're going to do this and you're going to do that, but you will inevitably meet with resistance in a lot of cases. So this is just a slightly different approach that just makes it a little bit more softly, certainly in the early stages of trying to bypass that critical faculty with your client. Okay, so just saying I want instead of I am just quietens that critical faculty down a little bit, so that the client doesn't feel challenged. So just remembering that. So it's just a little bit there. I'm not going to go on too much more about self-hypnosis itself, but I think it's quite important to remember that any hypnosis you're doing, it's self-hypnosis. You know, that's what's happening there. You're not controlling them, they're in control. Okay, so following on from when we were talking about suggestions, although we're not going to actually be working with these tonight, because I think we're still at that stage really where it really is about understanding the client. So I think to jump in with the solution and jump in with the suggestion is kind of counterproductive. But there will come a time, and this is where it is in the module, so I will talk about this. It's quite simple, but something called compounding suggestions and loops is a really good thing to introduce into positive suggestions. And you could even use them with those very light suggestions that we've talked about there. And they're really there to reinforce and increase the effectiveness just by linking two things together. And funnily enough, on a negative basis, and you'll see this more when we get to habits as well, habits quite often have links. You know, if somebody wants to give up smoking, quite often the association that is there with the drink, or therefore I must smoke, or I'm socializing, therefore I must drink. So quite often these things come together on a negative way, but that also can happen in a positive way. So the idea in this particular type, the compounding suggestion, is that your client will respond to the first suggestion, and it's what will happen after that. So a very sort of direct approach could be each time you breathe out, you will go deeper into relaxation. So it's very suggestive. And you'll notice some of that from some of the inductions that we did. It's kind of, it's like, oh yes, oh I do. Yeah, I can feel myself going deeper into relaxation. Or you can take the approach, which is more about giving permission. So as you listen to the sound of my voice, you can remember that you can feel completely relaxed. Okay, so it's that initial statement is what the client's going to do. And the second statement is what will happen if they do that. Okay, so if you breathe in really deeply through your nose and you breathe out, then your muscles will soften and so on. So you're telling them what's going to happen. So it's just linking the two together. And then a further step on from that is the compounding loops, with just a little bit more. So you link 2 or maybe more compounding suggestions into this loop, and they're reinforcing each other. So the more you allow yourself to relax, the better you'll feel, and the better you feel, the more you'll be able to relax. So it's just kind of full circle. Or as you decide to feel healthier and lighter, the more you choose foods with sparkly energy, the healthier and lighter you will feel. Okay, so you'll notice when you look at some of Andrew's webinars that he uses this a lot. He might even just use that in general conversation and just the general sort of hypnotic patter as he's talking. So it's just obviously become very second nature with him. So just a couple of useful things there that you'll probably use a little bit further down the line, but really covering those today there because they're in this module. And I'm not sure if they're in your questions, but just to make sure that you are aware of those. Okay, so you can forget those for now. Well, not forget them, but you won't be using them. Okay, so we're going to get into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty, not so exciting bits, just briefly, but just talking a little bit more about your role as a hypnotherapist. And what's expected of you. Now, obviously, as any therapist, you're expected to put your client first and to provide the best care that you possibly can. But you will sometimes find that you will get a client that perhaps you don't have the experience to handle. It might be that you would know that actually they need to go to another healthcare professional, or you might need to send them to a more experienced hypnotherapist that deals with that particular thing. So, say, for example, something like PTSD, it's a very, very specialist area. And it might be that a client comes to see you and you know that really perhaps you don't feel able to deal with that. So you might refer them to somebody else that might specialize in that, either another hypnotherapist or another particular type of therapist. So you need to familiarize yourself with the different types of therapies. I think we said this earlier on, really, in one of the other modules. Understanding where you fit in with some of these other therapies is quite important. And you will inherit people from other types of therapies. I certainly inherit a lot of people from counselling and CBT. So it's quite important you have an understanding of what they may have covered and what their experience may have been like. Something else that is a good idea is once you've qualified is to have a supervisor. In fact, some of the associations that you will be sort of registered with, like the NCH, for example, will insist that you do have a supervisor for the first sort of 2 years of your practice. It's usually, I think it's around about £30 a session. I think it varies from person to person, and it'd be something that you'd be expected to do perhaps once a month. And Vanessa, who works for Andrew, is our sort of supervisor. That doesn't mean you have to use Vanessa, but she is lovely and very, very helpful. So that's always there for people once they've qualified. But it's a really nice opportunity if you don't have people to talk to about maybe something you're coming up against. Obviously, you wouldn't be discussing major details or private details, but you could get some guidance from other therapists that might be more experienced. So it's a good thing to do.
Just a question.
Yeah, of course.
Sorry to interrupt. Does a supervisor come into a session? So when we go back to, non-COVID restrictions, would they come to a session and supervise you, or would it be more like through a call?
That I guess that is a possibility, but you'd need the client's permission. because obviously it's private and confidential, which we'll come to in a moment actually. But generally it's more as a bit of a mentor for you, so somebody that you can chat to in your early days of practice, to just make sure that you're doing things the right way. You can get some advice, but it wouldn't normally be something. Have you come across that, Heather, at all? Supervisor going into an actual session?
No, you tend to use a supervisor, yeah, like you're using me as a mentor at the moment.
More of a mentor, isn't it, really? It's having that sort of backup, if you like, to ask those questions, and if you've had a difficult session, or a couple of difficult sessions, just to sort of run them by your supervisor. But yeah, you wouldn't generally invite them into the session. I guess if it was something really, really difficult, there could be an exception in that, but you would definitely have to ask the permission of the client. The client. So yeah, but that's not generally what they're there for. Okay, but good question, Louis. As a therapist, and I'm sure there's a couple of you out there that already are therapists, so obviously the client is your main concern. As soon as you get into that therapy room with your client, you're in their world. You leave whatever you've got going on in your life behind. And at some point in the modules, we will talk about transference, because sometimes you will get triggered as well. So that is something that we can talk about a little bit later on. But it's very important that you just completely give them yourself while you're there. It's all about them. And even if they're saying things and you're thinking, oh, I know exactly what they mean, I must, it's nothing to do with us. We do not talk about us in any way. It's all about them. It goes without saying, professional, high standard of care at all times, making people feel welcome, comfortable. We kind of talked about that a lot in building rapport and trust, and that's so key. If a client loses trust with you, that could have quite a major impact on them. They may say things to you in that room that they've not said to anybody else. So really have got to get that right. Make sure you keep up to date with new things. You'll find once you are qualified, you'll see all sorts of things around, but make sure that you are always keeping yourself up to date. Andrew offers other additional courses. I think there's a PTSD one that's just happened. There's a hypnobirthing one coming. Doesn't mean you have to do it all with Andrew, obviously, but just keep yourself up to date with what's happening there. Following the code of conduct, being lawfully so on, and just being personally accountable for anything you do as a therapist and your sort of professional activity and so on. Okay, so that's basics. There's nothing there probably, I'm sure, that you don't really know. A lot of it goes without saying. And obviously there are certain guidelines to follow as well. Now, a big one is confidentiality. Now, in terms of as soon as a client comes into your therapy room, nothing that they say goes outside that room. They need to have complete trust. And unless you have expressed permission from them, you don't reveal any information anywhere else. Okay, so that's on the whole the most, that's how it goes. There are occasions when you may have to breach that, and that's usually in extreme situations, but even the slightest hint of you actually breaching that trust that you have with that client can have quite a major effect on you as a therapist. It could come back on you, but also on them, because they would lose that trust. Now, if there's anything you're unsure about, so if there is something that you're not sure if you should be sharing, I'm going to give you a few examples in a moment, but this is what your supervisors are for, or perhaps a mentor, or one of the professional bodies that you belong to. And there's quite a few different professional bodies that you can go to, sort of the GHR being one of those, the NCH, CNHC, there's quite a few different ones that you can get some advice on. Okay, in an emergency, obviously you may have to make a judgment call and decide what you feel is appropriate, but try and take advice wherever you can if you're not sure. Now, there are exceptions to the rule, and it does tend to be rare. I've never yet had to inform anybody of anything, and had to break that confidentiality. The obvious ones, which some of you will already be aware of, is if you think that that person is either going to do harm to somebody else or is going to harm themselves in some way. Okay, so there are certain guidelines that you can sort of look at to see exactly what you would do. And I'd recommend that you all watch the webinar on this and GDPR as well, which we'll come to in a moment as well. So you get a little bit more information on that. But in general, unless they're going to do harm to themselves, or you believe they are actually going to, you know, perhaps they've suggested they're going to do harm to somebody else, you would keep everything confidential. Okay, now the NCH and the GHR are two of the associations that you will be registered with by the time you're qualified. I think that comes as part of your qualification. Now, William Broome, who's the head of the GHR, says that on one of those rare occasions where a therapist may consider breaching confidence, but it's always a judgment call by the therapist concerned and will depend on the particular circumstances encountered. So just a few examples here that might be a reason that you might need to. If you have a client that's threatening suicide and you actually believe that they might do something about it, you may then need to contact their GP. And this is the sort of information that you will get on the forms that you will develop for your practice, which I'll point you to in just a moment. So either with the client's permission, or in some cases, if you really believe they're about to go and do something about it, without their permission. So that could be an exception where you might have to breach confidentiality. If the client suggests that he's going to, or he or she is going to commit a serious offence against somebody else, again, you may have to breach that confidentiality, and it might be that you would have to contact the police or social services. But again, be really, really careful that you know that that's actually going to happen, because sometimes they will say things and they won't be true. But again, don't worry too much about this. I certainly haven't come across this myself yet. So it's not something that's going to be happening all the time. I think sometimes when you hear these things, it all sounds a bit scary, the thought that these things could happen. So really, it gives you a rough idea of the sort of most likely scenarios. And all of this information is in your module anyway. And as I said, I would recommend that you watch the webinar on that to get a little bit more information so that you feel sort of comfortable with what you should and you shouldn't do in that situation. Okay, any questions about that? No? Okay. Okay, in terms of confidentiality in your record keeping, goes without saying, keep all your records secure. If you're keeping them on a computer, make sure they're password protected and in a locked cabinet if you've got notes that you're writing down and keeping, and just make sure that you're up to date on all the latest GDPR with regard to that. And this is actually a link here to the webinar there, which is all about GDPR, the law, and you as a practitioner. So do, when you can, take time to look at that. Okay, that should give you some important information. Probably not something you need to worry about just yet, but it's worth thinking about for along the line. Okay. And then, of course, there's the keeping yourself safe. Okay. Invariably, you will be working alone with that person. It's not something you're going to have somebody with you. So you do need to be, careful that you look after your own safety. If you're ever unsure, and occasionally you will have a conversation with a client on the phone and you'll think, not sure I feel very comfortable about this, then make sure that you do have somebody that's not too far away, or they know where you are, just to make sure that you're okay. Make sure that you're not working in a building on your own where there's nobody else around. I know that actually when I first started, I was working for a company where they would book appointments for me initially. And that did happen to me a few times, and it shouldn't have done. So, make sure that you're protecting yourself there. If you're going off to do a home visit, which some of you may decide to do, again, make sure people know where you are. And if somebody is behaving inappropriately, for example, if somebody comes in and they're under the influence of drink or drugs, then make sure that you're confident and you ask them to leave. If somebody did do that, for example, somebody that was coming to you about perhaps giving up drugs or drink or something like that, it doesn't mean you don't ever have to see them again. That's totally your call, what you decide to do to that. But you obviously wouldn't work with them in that state. One, it wouldn't be effective, but also you putting yourself at risk. So you shouldn't need to do that. Okay, so just make sure that you're very clear about that. But again, it's not something that's going to happen all of the time. So, okay, I'm not going to go through in detail the client agreement and consent forms. They're on pages 42 to 51 in your module. So have a good look through that. And I believe one of your questions will be to put one of these forms together, either in this module or another module. So if you have any questions about that, do feel free to email either Heather or myself if you need any extra help on that. But the good thing about doing this, when you do that as part of the module, you've kind of already set up your form ready for when you begin your practice. So it's quite nice to have that done. But just going through all the nitty-gritty with you now is probably a little bit counterproductive. Okay. So any questions about anything to do with that there? All quite straightforward.
I do have one regarding the like breaching, about talking about clients and stuff, because I have noticed that like I've seen on the chat, people ask questions about client sessions.
Yeah.
How much of that is okay?
That's okay.
Like,
you're not using names. You know, you don't talk
okay.
about who that is. But the whole idea of the Facebook groups, I mean, you know, there's 3 of them there, is so that you can help each other if you're having a problem with a particular thing, but you would never reveal the identity.
Okay, that's fine. So as long as no one knows who it is, you can.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you know, and amongst yourselves,
Yeah.
if you wanted to talk to us about it, if you want to talk to Heather and myself about something that you might be dealing with, absolutely fine. Just don't reveal the identity. That's all.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Okay, good question. Okay, so moving on to Dave Ellman. Now, some of you have already been aware of that. Siri, you're an expert in this. Where's she gone? I can't see you there now. Okay. Right, so we're going to look today at Dave Ellman, rapid inductions and deepeners. Now, Andrew's quite a fan of Dave Ellman in some ways, and you'll notice that some of the things that come out of Dave Ellman's inductions, you will find elements of those in Andrew's when he's talking, but he doesn't use necessarily Dave Ellman's inductions exactly as they are. Okay, so he will take elements of those, and I certainly do as well. I take bits of them, but I don't necessarily use a complete Dave Ellman induction. Now, Dave Ellman was actually initially a stage hypnotist and became a hypnotherapist, but he was more known really for teaching other people in the medical profession, so doctors, dentists, that sort of thing. He wrote a book called Findings in Hypnosis, now just I think retitled Hypnotherapy, and you can find all the transcripts of his lectures. So if it's a technique or his approach is something that you're interested in, you can certainly read all of those transcripts and find out more about how he approached things. He's known for pioneering somnambulism, or the creating of somnambulism, which is using rapid inductions that could be creating that almost sleepwalking state. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, because there's a little bit of misunderstanding around that in some ways. Okay, he also rediscovered, because he didn't discover it, the Esdale state, also known as the coma state, which is quite often used with doctors again and dentists, because it kind of induces that sort of pain-free state. As I said, it wasn't him that actually came up with that, but he did actually teach this to doctors and dentists. So the two states we're talking about here, so you've got somnambulism, which is, as I said, it's like the sleepwalker state, and it's the state that when people come to see you, they expect you to put them into. Okay, that's what they're expecting. It isn't always what's going to happen, and it isn't always necessary either. So people will have, you know, I don't know how many times I've heard the phrase, "Are you going to make me cluck like a chicken?" You know, I get quite bored of that, but that's what people expect. But it was used for performance, but it isn't absolutely necessary for you to create this state with every client. Okay, and I'm sure you're getting that idea already, that you can have as much effect by not necessarily being in that sort of somnambulistic state. And talk a little bit more about in a moment. And the Esdale state, the coma state, was actually attributed to James Esdale. So for those of you that have done your history essay already, I don't know how many of you have, he was obviously one of the pioneers in hypnosis. And he actually performed thousands and thousands of operations in this very deep state of hypnosis. Again, so that the clients were not feeling pain. So they're the two states that Dave Ellman is mostly associated with. And as I said, he kind of brought back the Esdale state and made that more popular again. That's not Dave Ellman, by the way, that's James Esdale. He didn't look like that. Okay, so this is a little note here from Andrew about some of the misconceptions around somnambulism, particularly, that you'll see quite often, particularly in America, and sort of in American hypnotherapists and American websites, saying that you have to have that somnambulistic state to do any sort of suggestion or regression, or the coma state as well. In fact, I read something today where it was an American website that says that, you know, in order to be a clinical hypnotherapist, which we all know now is solution-focused therapy, you must have the client in this somnambulistic state. But that's just not true. Okay, that isn't the case. It doesn't have to be like this. If you are doing something that is, you know, you're doing post-hypnotic suggestions, yes, that can be very effective. It can be a very good way to achieve that. But again, it depends what's happening with the critical faculty. We all know that. So it's not necessarily going to bypass that. But you can get a good quality with that. Something I would say though, is when you get to the point where you're doing regression and you're asking the clients to talk back to you, if they're very, very deep, they're going to find that very difficult. Okay, so that's not always the best place to have them. Oh, we just got somebody coming into the waiting room. Sorry about that. Oh. So yeah, just to sort of throw away some of those ideas that some people may have, that you have to have this state, because you just don't. Okay, you can get really good results without getting clients to that very, very deep state. And in some cases, as I said with regression, you want the client to be talking to you, and if they're that far down, you're not going to be getting that. So you're not going to necessarily get that change that you really want. Okay, so tonight you're going to have a go at doing some Dave Ellman inductions. Now I'm going to suggest that you do the one that Andrew works with. It's working with what Dave Ellman suggests, but it isn't taken directly from one of his scripts. And there are some people out there that are such big fans of Dave Ellman that they'll say you have to do it exactly like him. But Andrew finds that these work very well. So, and as I'm sure you'll recognise there now, just some of the things that Andrew does use in just some of his general inductions here. So the basic steps, and perhaps what makes them slightly different from some other inductions, is creating eye catalepsy. So basically telling the client that the muscles won't work. Okay, and you'll hear Andrew say quite often, it just feels like that muscles don't work anymore. You know, so you're suggesting to the client that they can't open their eyes. So that's one of the things that you're doing. The other thing is fractionalization, which is repeated induction over and over again. Okay, fractionalization can be very, very helpful for people that don't relax easily. I think Rachel quite likes this one, don't you? Fractionalization. Am I right? You there, Rachel? I'm not sure if Rachel's here tonight. She was. I think she was earlier.
I like fractionation.
I don't.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
Like it.
Yeah. I think it is, so it can be very effective. Other people might not like it at all. It'd be interesting to see how, when you do this tonight, how people feel about it. I personally don't like it, because I find when I'm doing it, I just want to go. I'm ready to go wherever they're going to take me. But it can be very effective. And then there's those suggestions of physical relaxation. So again, you'll hear Andrew in some of his webinars just suggesting that level of relaxation, and that powerful suggestion of how they're going to feel. So they're just some of the key elements, if you like, of the Dave Ellman approach, and he just takes elements that he likes. But as far as Andrew's concerned, there's no rules, and you will find once you're running your own practice that you will adapt your inductions to work for yourself. So this is all lots of ideas, really. Okay. There's also, you're going to find these in your module, but Dave Ellman also introduced several deepeners to work with these particular, with the induction. And Andrew again has a version of this, which I'm going to suggest you use for tonight when you're trying this up, when he suggests that you are taking the client down to different levels. Okay, so, and with Dave Ellman, he tends to check in with the client and ask them when they're at that level 1 and when they're at that level 2, level 3. Andrew says he doesn't always do that. It's up to you whether you do that or not. I quite often will check in with clients because I quite want to know where they are. Have they gone down to that level that I want them to be? So it's totally up to you. As Andrew says, there's no particular rules on that. Yeah, so that's what you're going to do tonight. So hopefully you've all got your modules there and you've got those scripts in front of you. If any of you want to read more on Dave Ellman, as I said, his original scripts will be in his book Hypnotherapy, and it's worth having a good read through for sort of just to really get to know what works for you and what you like. And you might take elements yourself to put your own scripts together eventually when you're actually out there practicing. But for now, stick to the one that you've got there in the module. So going to go into breakout rooms shortly. Before we do, is there anybody got any questions about this? Yeah, what I'm going to suggest on top of this, no, I'm not. No, don't worry. Ignore that. Okay. Let's just get rid of this for a minute. Okay, got you all there. Yeah, so going into breakout rooms now, practicing those. Have a bit of a chat about them afterwards. I mean, we've got, how long have we got? We've got about 3/4 of an hour, I think. So that gives you about 10-15 minutes each to have a go at that and have a chat and see how you feel about it afterwards. And it'll be, as I say, interesting to see who enjoys that approach and who doesn't, how effective you find it. Very different to the progressive muscle relaxation, really. So, okay.
Does everybody have the notes to hand?
Sorry?
Does everybody have the notes to hand? Have they actually got their modules with them?
I hope so. Has everybody got their modules with them?
Got it saved on my laptop.
Okay, you should all be there then. Okay, there's a few of you I can't see. I can just, so I'm, oh, Louis, you got your notes, Louis? Yeah, Claire, Louise. Okay.
Rue is driving, so whoever's in Rue's group, just be aware that she won't be participating quite so much.
Oh, that could be interesting, yes. Okay, perhaps she'll be observing. Yes,
I think so for a while, yes.
Yes, I'm sure. Okay, right, so no questions then? You're all ready to go? Okay, off to your breakout rooms. See you in a moment.